the inspiration for my presentation today arose from a very trivial, if you want, and superficial observation. With the recent pandemic, both cities and faces are both involved in processes of redesign their visual narratives. These days, as we know, for security's sake, respectively, some part of face must be hidden by a sanitary mask, and some spaces in the city must remain closed, and certain aspects of city life tied to sociality are temporarily off. Faces are partially covered and cities are partially empty, so both temporarily appear as invisible or obscure. Therefore, in turn, both faces and cities, following this analogy, are considered like a threat for the human safety as a potential source of infection. For one side, current scientific evidence suggests that COVID-19 spreads between people through facial secretion, and on the other side, the participation to city life, which implies taking transportation, going shopping, queuing, so on and so forth, have been dramatically questioned for increasing the possibility of perpetuating the infection. So as a consequence, similarly impacted, faces and city are involved in a redefinition of the visual narratives. For instance, fashion industry is currently involved in creative invention of new fancy sanitary masks, like transparent. Our colleague Marco works on the topic, L'Oreal, etc. While makeup industry is in charge of valorizing the part of the face that remain visible, and at the bigger scale, urbanists and policymakers are involved in the redefinition of the city discourse. So to reduce and to the city geography too. So to reduce social interaction, decentralizing movement and mobility. In such a crucial moment for both face and city as a phenomenon, in such crucial moment for their visual storytelling redefinition, the idea of a facial cartography of the city, with which I title this talk today, comes from the famous epilogue of Jorge Luis Borges' story El Hacedor, that refers to a man who wanted to draw the wall and populate the world with all sorts of geographic elements such as provinces, kingdoms, mountain, bay, ships, island, fishes, room, instruments, star, horses, and individuals. But just before dying, the man discovered that, and I quote from Borges, the patient labyrinth of lines trace the lineaments of his own face. I close the quote. So very poetically, Borges evokes a sort of isophermism between face and city lineaments, according to which we may say, every time I draw a city, that's then that every time I try to represent a city, I inevitably end up representing a face. So with this talk today, I'm going for a stroll, for a not structured stroll through different city models, trying to examine such face and city isophermism. As a premise, and by reversing Borges' poetic image, it's an evidence that face portraits have extensively marked the urban landscape and the face. We had a very nice example before with Sylvia's talk. So face as a figurative element has been a very, very important part of the city landscape, and as metonymically, and face has been used metonymically for represent the density of the city life. Let's mention, for instance, this very famous Ezra Pound poem in a station of the metro, in which the poet used 14 words, the apparition of the face in the crowd, petals in the wet black cloak, this is very, very well known, for describing the vibrant city of Paris. If an accumulation of face stands for the urban crowd, the posture of standing from the crowd with an oversized face refers to a different power position with respect to the above-mentioned crowd. In that regard, the Soviet propaganda represent the posture of the leader who standed out from the crowd using the photomontage technique. Both in these two posters, Stalin extended the front of the Statiagnotic movement and the result of first 5-year plan. You can see how the oversized face of the leader emerged from an undistinguished and anonymous crowd, marking his position of first among equals. So in each of these visual tales of the city, the face, blurred and remarkable in the middle of a crowd, or as the opposite, the face that stands up on the crowd, also articulate different scopic fields. And by so doing, it reveals the different scopic agencies of every composition. In other words, different way of seeing within the urban picture, within the urban composition. So consider this. In the following, I will propose another series of images of a face exposed in the contemporary city, sort of urban portraits, mediated by a screen, being digital or analog, such as Facets, as brilliantly illustrated by my colleague before. So I'll draw my attention on the role of face in articulating different position of spectatorships for the actant viewer that is thematized by the actor citizens. At least in theory, the series of examples that I'm going to propose would deploy, diachronically speaking, a progressive redistribution of the gaze and consequently a gradual intrusion of the instant of the actor citizens in the city tale, in the city narrative. The series, we insist, at least in theory, would deploy at the first reading a path to a progressive co-ownership of the city discourse. Already in Modern City, as described by Benjamin Visage, the reflective surface of the windows, and I quote, brings the open expanse, finish of the quote, and by so doing deceive the eye of the runner. And if we make a jump in the era of the globalization, this illusion of space expansion mentioned in the tales of the modern city goes further, thanks to the capillary diffusion of the digital screen that articulate the city, the contemporary city landscape. In particular, in the so-called postmodern city as theorized by the various postmodern theories, where the individual is increasingly linked to consumption, the urban center and be turned into purely commercial space, at least if we follow the theory of the postmodern city. And outdoor advertising and be emerging with significant implication for the composition of the public space. The iconic digital billboards of Times Square and Piccadilly Circus, that you can see in the slide, became the spotlight for hosting a giant portrait of the celebrities. And so did Shibuya Scramble Crossing in Tokyo, where the composition made of logos and celebrity face gaze upon the busy pedestrian crossing, the famous busy pedestrian crossing that is considered the biggest crossing pedestrian in the world. So the citizens from above consume from the huge bright billboard above, and they are spectators, they are just spectators of the city light show. So the critics of consumeristic society and the anti-globalization movement for what we can call a no-logo city, just to mention the famous motto from the very famous Naomi Klein text, claim, among other things, for a reappropriation of the public space to be in turn expropriated from the branded faces and bodies exposed as commodities. As an example, we found this kind of inspiring work from a Spanish artist called Vermibus that focus on the hijacking on the branded face under the claim, under very ideological claim, we can say, no heads, no stereotypes, no lies. So what the artist does, he collects advertising posters from the street and them in his studio. What he does is using solvent, he brush away the face and the flesh of the models that appear in the poster. Here we have an example. He also did it to a series of posters with Kate Moss, called Unsolving Kate. So when the face manipulation is completed, the artist reintroduce the poster in the original location along a city, of a road, or in a square. So we can say by erasing the face, the artist claims to recover the private spaces, the public space from consumption, and transform it and give back to the community, to the community space. So, well, beyond the artistic value of such action, that is not at stake here today, what it seems relevant to our discourse is the alleged reappropriation of the city through a sort of face and eyes erasing gesture, evoking a sort of blinding operation. After the erase of their eyes, the models look like blind, and their gaze, that would represent the gaze of the capitalism, of the consumerism, and their gaze is thus silenced. The wall of the city at this point can be ready for hosting new faces. So in such regard, and as a step further towards this alleged participation to the city gaze by the city, we can't not mention the already mentioned work of JR, that, as we know, prompt is all his artistic research around faces. So in this case, I see, throughout several projects, the faces of the citizens have been wallpaper on different emblematic spaces, as we know, such as Israeli West Bank or the Rio de Janeiro favelas, or as we know, the Mexican border. So the idea behind such series of projects is to promote a new form of participatory urban storytelling, with which the citizens are allowed to take up more physical space in the city that they normally used to. So in these ways, rhetorically, the citizens is not just a mere spectator, but her or he takes part in the urban visual composition. In the case of the project Women Are Here, that you see on the right of the slide. The conquest of a certain visibility of the normally excluded by the urban tale is figuratized by the exposition of the eyes, in this case of the local women all over outside the favelas. Suddenly, according to the author intention, suddenly giving a female gaze to both the hill and the favelas. So the fragment of the face, in this case, have been broken down and fragmented into their details to create a proper refacialization of the city. The informal and uneven surface of the urban slums have been equipped with the gaze as a means of, as we were saying, giving visibility and gaze to what traditionally is excluded by the city's visibility fields. So beyond the engagé rhetoric that is present in JR artistic research, what matter here, what matter for our little journey that we are doing through this urban image of face, what matter is the citizen's face is the center of the composition. And so the fact that the citizen is not just able to see, but also able to be seen and susceptible to be seen. Such appropriation of the urban assets can be related on the rise on the new business models that now are not so new anymore. Under the umbrella of the so-called sharing economy that recently redesigned the ownership of the assets, laying on the similar narrative of the user-centered technology and then of the disintermediation between offers and demand. So we already are very familiar with the discourse of corporations, sharing corporation with this oxymoron, such as Uber or Airbnb, that they don't own the car, nor the properties, but they extract value from the user appropriation of those assets. Furthermore, an alleged collaborative city, which is the city ideology, we can say behind this face representation. This is our thesis. So furthermore, the citizens are also provided with several platforms and tools that supposedly are meant to enable them to participate in different domains and taking voice in very urgent topics such as environment, mobility, education, and politics, and so on. So the social innovation discourse that has its artistic counterpart in works such as JR1's has been also popularized by the notion of co-creation, urban living, hackathons or data bootcamp, and so on. So to stress that they need to design and develop new city application in collaboration with the citizens. So in this, let's say, collaborative ideology, in such a collaborative and citizen-focused climate, align with the narrative of the presumption and the peer-to-peer, of course, the role of social media and the user-generated contents in reinforcing and keeping further the ownership of the city discourse is clearly deployed by projects as Selfie City, that all of us we know very well. The project with which Manovic and his team collected more than 600,000 of Instagram picture over a specific lapse of time in 5 cities, just New York, São Paulo, Berlin, Bangkok, and Moscow. So the aim of this well-known project is to question what social media, visual social media, and in particular Instagram, tell us about the relationship between the city and the individuals. So the interrogation put the face of the city dwellers at the center and specifically their sale for trades. So we already are familiar with the methodology that the Manovich team used for face analysis, supplemented by also human judgment, in order to estimate the age and the gender of the people in the picture, and also the facial expression of the selfie in a city as be interrogative for examining which city smiled the most, being Bangkok the most smiling, and Moscow the less, as we maybe can expect. Anyway, differently from the JR fragments of face pasted in the slum, just from a merely composition point of view, Selfie City appears as a mosaic of faces, at least the visualization of, we refer to the visualization of the project, of course. So the miniaturist face are contained in a grid, putting side by side in a series. The piece of the mosaic at the same regular side, and together they create a unified series which does not present any discontinuity or rupture. So with the series, we'll be articulating along different tales of the city through face portrait. The selfie at the center of Manovich project represent another turn in the facial urban narrative. As it had been widely discussed within visual studies and semiotic, the selfie is technically a look back achieved through the invention of the forward-facing camera. So in Selfie City, the city landscape disappear from the representation, giving the floor to the citizen face whose gaze looks back to him or herself. This is for us the most remarkable thing in our talk. So an alleged collaborative city designed by the city user through user content generation is so represented not just by the citizen face as in the previous project, but by a reflective gaze that capture nothing else than itself in the composition. So nonetheless, such supposedly gradual appropriation of the city still relies on aesthetic self-portrait of the user. In this sense, one may say that, for example, facial recognition technology ideally, and I stress ideally, would allow user to fully interact with the city landscape, being recognized as individuals, and so citizens would be allowed to take part, to be taken away from the city crowd anonymity, by stressing this aspect of recognition, like giving a recognition to the citizens. Obviously talking like in a paradoxically way. So in the selfie, if in the selfie city is a static composition referring to the past, the moment of the shot of the selfie, the facial recognition system spreads in the contemporary public space can not just reverse the gaze towards the cities, but also subvert, in theory, the narrative of the city. So let's clarify what we mean with the last example of an urban faciality configuration. So the image you can see in this slide is from a campaign promoted by a British charity, Women Hate. That is a charity association against domestic abuse. So the organization unveiled different billboard placed in different busy area in London, obviously busy before the pandemic, with a portrait of a bruised face women's plea, "Look at me." The facial recognition technology embedded in each of these posters is able to read the gaze of the passerbys. If people ignore the billboard, nothing happens. They return to the condition of mere spectators, as in the case of the advertising billboard in the so-called media city. But if the passerbys, but if the citizens stop and look at the poster, the woman's face begins to heal. People are also captured on a camera and projected on a live feed at the bottom of the screen. So following the discourse of the campaign, thanks to the recognition of his or her face, the citizens become not only the owner of the city, of the public life tale, but also ideally responsible for the ethics of the entire city, considering the mission of the campaign, the domestic abuse. So obviously everybody in this room is aware of the fact that all critical issues tied to the facial recognition technology as perpetuator of a surveillance system. So in the scientific, recently the scientific literature, the advent of algorithm-based technology have revamped the reflection on a political face, often nurtured upon the notion of faciality already introduced by Deleuze and Guattari. In such vein, one of the main controversial issues regarding the alleged objectivity of the facial recognition system, that according to critics' readings of this technology respond to existing power and class structure in new surveillance system. And then going to the conclusion of this very not structured stroll, throughout a not systematic example of face configuration within the urban environment, we aimed at showing the tension operating within the urban scopic fields. The journey, the little stroll, has been, for time limitation, just a diachronic. We stress that it's a diachronic dimension. But we are aware that this should also be synchronic. In other words, if on the one hand, what we call the different, what we call as cartography, so to stress the reduction of the complexity of a city in a face. If on one hand we call the different configuration as a cartography, so to stress the reduction of a complexity in a face, on the other hand, cartography is a device that exceeds itself, and so is face. Facial cartography, the way we title this presentation, is thus a paradox that highlights a double illusion. The illusion of the reduction of the city to a map, and secondly, the illusion of identifying for each model of city a face, both semiotics concepts that are irreducible in Tor. So by closing our talk, cities is represented by a face, the extent to which the plurality of a face unreveal the excess of city representation. So in this double irreducibility, we situate, we resituate, we relocate the idea of a possible isophermism between city and face as semiotic production, which morph of the isophermism is stuff very difficult to grasp. So coming back to our initial parallelism, and I'm finishing. So coming back to it, in a moment of face and city occultation, we must speculate new features, way of rediscovering both city and face. Thank you for your attention and patience.